This is API Case Files.
Hear this message. Tune this channel. Like E.T. said, phone home.
Hello and welcome to episode 11 of API Case Files. I'm your host, Marsha Barnhart, and the Chief of Investigations for the Aerial Phenomenon Investigations Team. During this episode, I'll report on two cases out of Michigan and present a segment of my recent interview with Dr. Mark Rodeghier, who's heading up the science end of the UFODATA Project. I spoke with him shortly after my API Conversations interview with Dr. Alexander Wendt, a professor of political science at The Ohio State University. Both Dr. Wendt and Dr. Rodeghier are team members with the UFODATA Project and members of the board for the organization. Dr. Rodeghier spoke with me regarding the instrumentation, deployment, and gathering of scientific data planned for the project. Also on this episode of API Case Files, we'll hear from our Deputy Director, Paul Carr, on areas of research that may provide clues about technological ET civilizations via tantalizing deep space indicators making science news recently. Now, let's start the program with an examination of one of two Michigan UFO cases. Let me set the scene for the first case I'll discuss. It was 10:16 on a Tuesday night, October 4th, 2016. A young man had just left his place of employment at a golf resort outside a small town situated about 13 miles south of Jackson, Michigan. The night sky was clear and the temperature at 60 degrees was unusually warm on an October night in Michigan. As the young man turned onto a stretch of highway he traveled often, he saw a black helicopter flying very fast, moving just above treetop level. That in itself was enough to startle him into attention, but more arresting was the thing this helicopter seemed to be chasing. I'll let the witness from case 16-044 present the facts.
I'm driving, just going along. The music's pretty loud, so I didn't hear anything, but it's pitch black. There's nobody around. It's a pretty secluded town, like there's not much going on. And, I noticed something in the sky as I'm coming around the curves by the little marina store there. And I look up and I see a helicopter. That's the first thing I saw. Now, in front of it was a very, very vibrant, glowing orange light. And they were going very fast, and they were going very low to the north-northwest. By the time I had, while I'm driving, I'm trying to get off the road immediately. Put the car in park. By the time I got the car in park and had my phone on my camera ready, it had been over the tree line for about 1 second, so I had just missed it. But if I had to guess, it was going over 100 miles an hour, give or take 15, 20 miles an hour. But I know that it was going over 100. That was helicopter speed. I saw the outline of the helicopter, okay? This is where it got weird. I knew that it was something very odd because I could only see the outline of the helicopter. I couldn't see any outline of what it was chasing, which, was very, very, very bright ball of light. Anyways, I got to my friend's house, which is about 3 minutes after I saw it. Shared it on Facebook immediately after about 10 minutes. I got two people in the town just north of me, which is about 25 miles away. They said that they saw the same thing and heard it.
Okay. Now explain what it was, what the object was that you saw as best you can.
It's definitely, the best thing I can describe it as a ball of plasma.
Okay.
And it was about the size of, I don't know what to describe it as. It's a Volkswagen Beetle.
Oh.
Okay. It seems like it's something that's, has an objective or on a mission, to get somewhere. The only object I saw other than the ball of light itself was the helicopter that was chasing it. I know my military aircraft pretty well, and I know that it was smaller than a Black Hawk helicopter, but it was a little bit wider than an Apache attack helicopter. But it was black. That I am almost certain of because of the lights. I could see the lights coming off of the tail wing of the plane because it was so low. I would say, roughly 350, 400 feet above the ground.
Did it have navigation lights on?
It had one really dim blinking light, yes, on the tail wing, the tail fin.
Were there any lights in the cockpit?
No, it was just a single light, and I saw the silhouette of the helicopter.
All right.
Single light on the tail.
Single light on the tail. There was no searchlight on it.
No. Even if it had a searchlight, even if it was, even if it said police on it, I still would have said something because of what it was chasing.
Uh-huh. What did you see first, the helicopter or the object?
I saw both of them because they were within 10, 15, 20 feet. I don't know. The helicopter was immediately behind it.
10 or 15, 20 feet behind this Volkswagen bug-sized object.
Yeah.
This thing was following it?
It looked like it was chasing it. That was what my instinct told me, and that's what my, my very small knowledge of how flights work and how they do that sort of thing in the air as far as chasing things.
Okay, were there evasive movements on the orb's part?
There were not.
Okay. Now, there were no markings on the helicopter, or it was just too dark to see?
It was too dark to see because all I saw was the silhouette. Very small, but big enough to make out, the helicopter that I had just described to you.
And again, how high did you think that helicopter and the object were?
Immediately above the tree line, like brushing the treetops kind of thing.
Brushing the treetops, okay.
Certainly below the radar.
Uh-huh.
I know what I saw. I want to know, if anybody else has seen it. I want descriptions,
Other than the corroborating Facebook post by someone in the same general area as the witness, I could find no other reports matching this witness's description in that area that night. But reports similar to this, a blacked-out, low-flying military-style helicopter chasing an unusual object in the sky, is not unheard of. There have been, over the years, multiple reports of essentially this same type of activity mentioned in several UFO reporting sites. Within just a few days of this incident, I contacted the Dispatch and Records section for police and sheriff departments in Jackson, Michigan, and Lansing, Michigan. These departments serviced the area around which the incident occurred. None of the departments had any mention of similar reports or calls during the same time frame that the witness defined. I also submitted an FAA Freedom of Information request to the Central Air Traffic Control Office in Fort Worth, Texas, for any existing radar data regarding this incident. I eventually received a data disk from Detroit Air Traffic Control, but it did not show a low-flying aircraft in the specific area during the specified time frame. Now, the exercise in trying to get radar information from airports can be a frustrating affair. An FOIA request must be very specific in order to get the info of interest. There are difficulties and drawbacks that are too numerous to mention and vary with the particulars of any case. But I will say that I was provided a great deal of assistance and schooling on FAA FOIA request ins and outs by the FOIA specialist I worked with, Fabiola Mendez, at the FAA office for the Central Service Area in Fort Worth, Texas. Had it not been for her patient assistance, my foray for data would have been even more Byzantine than it was. But if this witness is truthful, and he did indeed see a low-flying helicopter that I could not find painted on radar data from Detroit Air Traffic Control, then it is likely that this helicopter was there but did not show up on radar. My investigation showed that it certainly is possible to fly under the radar. Military pilots practice a type of flying called nap of the earth flying, or NOE. This is used as a tactic to remain undetected and practiced primarily by smaller fighters and attack aircraft, and most especially, I found out, by attack helicopters. Quoting from a military page on Wikipedia, and I've included the link in the show notes, quote, "The lowest NOE flying is by helicopters because they have lower speeds and more maneuverability than fixed-wing aircraft. Helicopters can fly at treetop levels or even below the height of surrounding trees where there are clear areas, and under wires such as electricity poles rather than over them." End quote. So it certainly is possible to fly under the radar, especially for military helicopters trying to elude detection. In the end, I closed case 16-044 as undetermined. Yet another instance of a citizen encountering a blacked-out, low-flying military-style helicopter chasing an unidentified flying object.
This is API Case Files.
The second Michigan UFO case I'll dissect took place in the fall of 2008, but wasn't reported until March of this year, 2017. The witness had caught my guest appearance on podcast UFO with Martin Willis, where I discussed several past interesting cases. That prompted the witness to submit a report to our API website, recounting a fascinating close encounter with an unidentified flying object during broad daylight in the heart of downtown Detroit. Although it strains credulity, such encounters have been reported multiple times in very large metropolitan areas, from Manhattan in midday to St. Louis, Missouri during rush hour traffic to Brooklyn at dusk. Strange as it seems, sometimes weird encounters take place in areas that should engender multiple reports, yet seem to be only witnessed and reported by a single individual. Here's the witness from case 17013.
My estimation of the date of the event is November 15th of 2008. And it would have been in the middle of the day, probably about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. And this was a work day for me. It was sometime in the middle of the week. And so I was at work at the time. And I'm the head of maintenance for an apartment building. So my work entailed that day working in an apartment. I was cleaning things at a kitchen sink. And it was a bright sunny day, not a cloud in the sky. And something kept on reflecting light into my eyes. Sunlight is something outside the window is reflecting this light and catching my eye. And after maybe the third or fourth time that this has happened, I'm starting to get annoyed by it. So I walk over to the window to see what the heck this thing is hanging out there, reflecting sunlight into my eye. And so as I do that, I'm looking out the window and I can see, it's hard to judge the distance, but I would say it was probably not more than a couple miles away. Something in the sky. I assumed it was a traffic helicopter. I should also mention, this is right downtown Detroit. The apartment complex I work at is right in the middle of downtown Detroit. I'm right next to Comerica Park and Ford Field, which makes it all that much more strange. So I'm looking out the window, and this thing that I think is a traffic helicopter is reflecting light into my eye. And as I'm looking at it, it starts coming towards me, and it's covering ground really fast. It's coming right directly towards me. And, it gets to right outside my window in a matter of less than a minute. And as it's getting closer, I'm thinking to myself, that's not a helicopter. That's not a plane. What is this thing? I'm getting more and more curious. And finally, if I would have had a baseball in my hand, I could have nailed this thing with the baseball. So it was that close. It was within, I don't know, 10 yards, 15 yards, directly outside the window. I'm on the 13th floor in this apartment, and it's at eye level with me on the 13th floor. So it's, what would that be? Probably less than 100 feet. And once you see the pictures, you'll understand it's not just a round disc. It's more like the shape of like a 3-leaf clover. It's kind of 3 round discs together. And the craft was metallic, but not chrome. It wasn't like a reflective chrome. It was more like a brushed stainless steel, like you would see on appliances, like a stainless steel refrigerator or something like that. So it was reflective, but it wasn't a shiny chrome kind of reflective. And so here I am staring at this strange thing out my window, and it starts to, as I'm looking at it, it starts to rotate upside. So it's going from an upright position to a completely 90-degree where I'm looking at the bottom of this thing. And as it's rotating up, there's a red light right in the center of it that's flashing at just kind of a medium pace, not real fast, not real slow. It's just kind of almost like the rhythm of a heartbeat or something, you know? And then I noticed that there's 3 other lights. So like I said, it's like a 3-leaf clover kind of a thing. So each one of these clovers has a big white light right in the center of it. So I'm looking at a red light in the center, and then 3 white lights around that are larger. And now the 3 white lights kind of start to blink, and it's sort of doing a pattern, and it's slow at first, and it's speeding up, and it's speeding up, and the whole craft is rotating and rotating clockwise. And pretty soon this thing's just a blur of light, and it dawns on me, this thing's trying to hypnotize me. And as I realize that, the whole thing kind of stops, and the lights, it goes back to just 3 solid white lights and a slowly pulsing red light in the center. It just goes back to that. The whole craft rotates back down to upright position, and it just sort of floats off at that point, off to my right, to basically around the side of my building to where I can't see it anymore. I'm straining, looking out the window, trying to watch this thing as it just kind of goes around the side of my building and out of my line of sight. At that point, I ran out of the apartment and see if I can get my eyes on it again. And so that was the last I saw of it, was as it floated off.
Now, so you said that lasted about 5 minutes. Now, how big was this craft?
I estimate it to be about 30 foot from one end to the other. So that's not real big.
Well, 30 feet is a pretty big thing. I had a pool back in Baltimore. I lived 15 feet by 30 feet. That's a fair-sized craft to be hovering and showing itself 13 stories up?
Yeah, 13 stories up.
So you think it was about 30 feet?
Yeah.
You couldn't see all of it through the window?
I could. Yep, I could see the whole thing right through the window. We have big windows in this building as well. I was standing right at the window while I watched this thing. I fully expected to see this thing on the news or something that night, because I couldn't believe that I would be the only one in the middle of a major city to see this thing when it's just blatantly floating around like this around the city.
Can you give me some more real detailed information? Did it have any seams? Did it have any portholes or rivets or propulsion system or any stuff around it like it was giving off some type of heat? Tell me about the craft.
I didn't see any seams. I didn't see any rivets. No portholes or windows that I could see. I mentioned that it's sort of like a 3-leaf clover kind of a shape. Well, in the center of that is sort of a dome. So there's kind of a dome where it looks like maybe occupants would be inside of it. So basically, the whole top of it, all the sort of brushed stainless steel kind of look, like I mentioned, and then the whole bottom of it was really just covered in these lights. Although I didn't see the outer ring of lights, that part looked like it was metal to me as well. So when it first tipped up, it looked like there was metal around the bottom, around these three lights. Like it's a little hard to describe, but when the outer rings started lighting up, that sort of set me aback, just because it had looked like metal earlier, and then when those lights turned off, it looked like metal again right there.
Tell me about its movement.
It definitely didn't seem to be affected by wind, or it didn't float around like it was being affected by slight shifts in wind or anything like that. It was very deliberate. If it wanted to be 3 feet to the left, it could go there, and it could sit still like a rock just sitting there. And when it moved, like I say, when I first saw it, it was probably somewhere around 2 miles out, and it got over to me quick. So it moved with a quickness. The other thing I sort of realized, thinking about it after the fact, was that I feel like as soon as I was conscious of its being out there, when I walked over to that window and I made direct eye contact with that thing, I feel like that's when it was conscious of me, and it came over to check me out, like it almost sensed my conscious awareness of it. And so once I had sort of made contact with it, it shot right over to me in a short period of time. It covered that 2 miles quicker than any. I see a lot of things up in the sky around here. Like I said, I'm close to 2 stadiums, so the Goodyear blimp floats around here. There's always traffic helicopters up and down the expressways around here. I fully expected at first that this was a traffic helicopter, until when I saw the quickness that was quicker than I've seen any helicopters, and definitely quicker than any Goodyear blimp or any balloon could have ever moved.
Okay, now when you saw that craft, I'm assuming it made no noise?
Yeah, no noise whatsoever.
Okay, and did you get a sense that there was occupants in it, or did you get a sense that there was some kind of mental communication with you at all?
I feel like it came over to check me out specifically. I don't think that was an accident. But as far as I didn't get any sort of telepathic message or any kind of thought that maybe someone was trying to communicate, any more than just the light sequence seemed like communication of some sort. But this light pattern was unlike anything I've ever seen before. It started out slow, and it sped up to the point that it was literally just a blur of extremely bright and colorful, vivid lights like I've never seen on anything before. And so, yes, I felt myself being drawn in visually and sort of mentally. And I did mentally sort of put a block right there and say, hold on a second, what's this thing doing? And that's when the whole light show stopped, was pretty much as soon as I sort of put that mental block in my head saying, slow up here, what's going on?
And then it began to move away slowly?
Yep. The lights went back to just the 3 white lights on the bottom with one slow blinking red light. And it rotated back down slowly to an upright position and just slowly hovered off. I never saw it. I was expecting to see it shoot off into space or something, but I never did it. It never moved any faster than at the beginning, when it sort of saw me and came directly over to me. After that, it kind of just hovered off to the right. When it was all done, it hovered off to the right, and that was the last I saw of it.
You did find yourself becoming rather mesmerized by it, and you had an inkling that you might fall under its spell if you didn't extract yourself from the situation?
Yes, that's exactly what I felt like. I felt like this thing was trying to put me under some type of trance, hypnosis kind of a thing with this light pattern.
All right, and when you look back at it, you haven't noticed that there might have been a string of kind of odd things that you didn't think about at the time, like strange dreams or missing time or marks on the body or unusual premonitions or abilities you've acquired, anything along this line. It's not uncommon, so I was just wondering if it's happened with you too.
Sure, and I'm not the type to shy away or like if I thought that I had any missing time or if I thought that I had been abducted or something, I wouldn't hold that back. I'm not the type of person that's like ashamed of this. I tell everybody that'll listen, I'll tell them this story because I find it fascinating. I really don't care what people think of it because I know for a fact what I saw. So, but to answer your question, no, I don't. I can't think of anything else. I certainly didn't lose any time that day. I was watching the clock pretty carefully. Number one, because I was at work, and so I just sort of keep track of what I'm doing during the day. And number two, because when this happened, I had heard of missing time before, so I was sure to just sort of check the clock and make sure I wasn't missing any time at that point. I haven't had anything else strange happen to me. Yeah, there's nothing that comes to mind that could even be close to strange.
Well, other than feeling a little concerned that you might be mesmerized and hypnotized by it, did you have any visceral fear, or were you just in awe, or what was your emotional state during this?
I definitely wouldn't say it was fear. It was definitely more awe. I found it very intriguing and interesting and amazing.
All right, so now, next thing I want to talk to you about was, had you been thinking of anything in particular, or had you been having any experiences now that you look back on it that portended this, or is this completely out of the blue, an absolute one-time anomaly, nothing like this has ever happened to you or anybody in your family?
That is something that I found interesting. My mom has mentioned to me, I think twice in my life, that she saw a UFO before. She just sort of mentioned it and didn't go beyond that. After I told my story to her, she again repeated that she had seen a UFO when she was younger. And all I could really get out of her on it was that she was taking the garbage out at night, and she was a teenager, and she saw what she believed to be a UFO. And she didn't go into much more detail, and I kind of tried to press her on it a couple of times, and she really didn't give me any detail beyond she had seen something once when she was younger. So, but I do find that kind of interesting because ever since seeing this thing, I've done a lot of research on the subject. It kind of changed my outlook on life in a lot of ways, and so, but at the same time, I guess after the fact, I did become more concerned that, and once again, I wouldn't use the word fear, but there was definitely more of a concern that there might be more to this, that they might be coming back or something like that. So I'll tell you this, before this sighting, I was not a gun owner. So I grew up around guns. I just never felt the need to own one. And shortly after this sighting, I bought my first gun. I sort of felt like, it would be nice to have something on my nightstand just in case.
In the same year and month, November 2008, there were at least 7 other UFO reports from Michigan presented to the National UFO Reporting Center. Of those 7, 4 were from the greater Detroit metropolitan area. Again, in 1 month, in one area, sights of an unusual, low-flying, unidentified object in the sky over essentially a large population area. Yet, only a single report made. It's puzzling and hard to explain. Nonetheless, the witness in case 17-013 was credible. His sober account was nothing less than spectacular, but it could not be discounted out of hand as a hallucination or psychosis. I certainly can't make such a judgment, but nothing in the witness interview or uncovered during my investigation pointed to a hoax or delusion or outright lying. I closed this case as undetermined. Soon we'll hear from Paul Carr, API's Deputy Director. He'll present another episode of Unidentified Science. He examines the excitement around some intriguing incoming data that may provide hints regarding the scientific search for signs of extraterrestrial life in the cosmos. On the subject of searching for extraterrestrial life, some private citizens are involved in the systematic scientific search not in the cosmos, but closer to home. Dr. Mark Rodeghier is the scientific director and president of the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies. He's held this position since 1986 and has been active in the UFO field since 1974. He has conducted research and investigation into a variety of areas, including vehicle interference cases, abduction cases, and physical trace evidence. His work as the science director on the UFODATA Project deals with trying to fund and set up the operational deployment of scientific equipment to gather hard data on UAPs. I spoke with him at length on this endeavor, and you can hear that interview on API Conversations, Episode 7. The link is in our show notes. For this podcast, API Case Files, I excerpted a segment of my discussion with him regarding details on the process for deployment and acquisition of equipment.
We are going to buy as much as possible off-the-shelf equipment. Here's what we need to build a station. Just at a high level.
Right.
You have to decide first of all, and after you just think about, eventually we're going to have this much instrumentation, and we're going to need this much computing power, and a power supply, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Okay, it needs to be this big, and so it's going to be in this kind of enclosure. It's obviously part of it has to be enclosed for operational purposes, even though the instruments naturally have to be exposed to the atmosphere so they can do their thing.
Right.
Okay, then, so you need a design of the enclosure space and so forth and all that. The actual instrumentation, magnetometer, microwave detection, high-frequency radio waves, cameras, we're not going to build those. Those we're going to purchase because you don't want to build devices like that yourself. And there are sources where you can buy those. But in terms of great. Then in terms of the computing power, same thing. We're not going to build our own computer. We're going to either use a full-fledged PC, or we're going to use these things that are called Raspberry Pi boards or the equivalent, which are basically a very, very stripped-down computer. It's like a motherboard of a computer with processors, but without everything else hanging on it. Mm-hmm. And so we're going to use those. But the part that is, there's nothing proprietary, but the part that then becomes, okay, well, where does the work go in besides selecting all this is naturally linking it all together, getting the software to make it operate together, getting the right software to do the ID, the detection of things, the motion detection to decide, okay, we now should turn on the full-fledged cameras and the higher resolution cameras and record this and so forth. And so the software challenge is going to be one where it's very likely that we will have to possibly take existing open source software and modify. In fact, I'm sure we will to do that. That's my 10,000 foot view. The fact that UFOs interact with the environment, and of course, unfortunately, sometimes even cause injuries to people, that's been reported over the years, means that there's something substantial about them. For example, skeptics might want to say that, or debunkers really, right, that there's nothing to UFOs except misperceptions, hoaxes, hallucinations, et cetera.
Right.
And if that's the case, then, what about all these effects on equipment? What about these effects even on people? Et cetera. Of course, they have what they claim are explanations for that, but, I think we can agree that they're weak. And so, yes, UFOs interact with the environment. A simple statement like that is true. Mm-hmm. And so they leave traces in the environment. That's another way to put it. And so, we think it's possible to measure those things directly rather than, indirectly through their effect on an equipment or a person or, what have you.
Yeah.
The thing about the UFO phenomena is that if it is a natural phenomena, a strange but natural phenomena, then we should be able to learn a lot about it and make a significant amount of progress. Uh-huh. If it is a manufactured phenomena, at least some of it, right, by aliens or whatever, mm-hmm. we will learn different things, but we will also be able to rule out things like, if something's a plasma.
You have the ability to detect if this were a plasma ball, a gaseous type of thing, or a metallic kind of object?
If it's gaseous or a plasma, a spectrum will help you determine that. Uh-huh. If something was metallic and was reflecting the light of the sun, let's say a sighting was during the day, then the reflected light would, you wouldn't tell you it was metallic, but if we took a photo and got a spectrum, and the spectrum was of the sunlight, basically, attenuated and affected by the atmosphere, then we would say, okay, well, whatever it is, it's reflecting sunlight. There's a solid object there or something solid enough to be reflecting sunlight. Would that prove it's metallic? It wouldn't prove it's metallic, but it would certainly show that there was something solid there. Okay. So again, that's why the spectral capabilities are really what we think could be the key. Like we don't want to assume too much, though. It's possible that we might we're going to measure very high frequency, radio waves and low frequency receivers as well. We're going to measure all that part of the spectrum that is, above the end of the light, the red end of the spectrum and above microwaves. And if we can measure that, maybe something will show up there that, beyond the infrared that we say, oh, look at that, this particular bit of radiation, at this frequency and this intensity, this indicates such and such, right? Who knows what that would be? So we don't presume anything except to say that, we're just looking to measure everything and then see what we see. So imagine that we're still trying to figure out the exact characteristics of ball lightning, and scientists know it exists. There are literally dozens of theories about it, but no one theory that people have agreed on. So here's the ball lightning, a half a mile away. What do we want to measure about it? Well, there's a lot of things we want to measure, and those turn out to be exactly the same as what we want to measure about UFOs. We want to measure its magnetic field. We want to actually measure the temperature around us and the atmospheric pressure and the humidity, just in case those are important. We might want to measure any sound waves that come off this, even at very, very low frequency. Mm-hmm. We certainly want to take a picture, and yes, we want to get with a spectrograph so that we get a spectrum or spectrums. We want to get more than one, hopefully, of the spectra of the object, so that we can, of course, find out, what it's composed of. You can learn, of course, a tremendous amount from a spectrum of an object, and so as we do with the stars and our sun and other things up in the sky. And so that's really the key measurement is that. But we also want to measure various types of other information that's in the full spectrum, like microwaves, radio waves, all those kinds of things. probably not. We don't think that these things are emitting gamma rays or X-rays. Those are not easy to. You can measure that, but it's a little more expensive to get the instrumentation for that. And also, UFOs, if they're emitting this, aren't emitting it at such a intensity that it would probably be easy to detect. And one reason we think that is because people don't get close to UFOs and then die later from exposure to X-rays or gamma rays. Mm-hmm. There have been a few cases of people being reporting injuries from UFOs, but they're thankfully very, very rare. And so that area of the electromagnetic spectrum is not one that we would concentrate on. In other words, high intensity radiation down there at that range.
Yeah.
We're also not going to be looking for neutrinos. I mean, I'm just casting far afield to say, well, we could look for particles being emitted by this. But we're not. That of course requires detectors that are, well beyond any reasonable capability. Even though, of course, could these things be emitting in excess of some particle? Again, not too much, of high energy like cosmic rays, but something else that passes right through everything like neutrinos. And the answer is, well, I guess they could be. But but basically you can't detect that, so in an easy way. So we're not even going to conceive of it. But basically, in summary, we want to measure everything that is reasonable and feasible, and also cost not an arm and a leg to measure about this, because we don't know what piece of data might give us a clue, mm-hmm. And reveal more about the nature phenomena. So we would like to measure as much as possible. So we would be able to say, well, we took a photo and this thing looks like it's an object, and in fact, the spectrum that we got shows that it's not a plasma or a gas and so forth. Mm-hmm. So we could begin to rule things out. What I'm getting at now is that, and this is true also with UFO sightings in general, you can't prove that something is alien technology. Mm-hmm. That's of course the thing that interests all of us is, gee, could there be aliens visiting Earth, and are UFO sightings a manifestation of that? Mm-hmm. And so that is such a tantalizing, but also such an extreme hypothesis, extreme being naturally one that goes well beyond the boundaries of conventional science, that the only way to definitively demonstrate it and to say that, well, there's really some potential of validity here, this could be true, is to get evidence that is almost incontrovertible. What would that be? That would be a piece of a UFO which had isotope ratios that didn't match those on Earth or in the solar system. Yeah. Or things like that, or a manufactured device that its isotope ratios were the same as here, but its characteristics and what it did didn't match anything manufactured on Earth. Things like that scream alien technology. Yeah. Measurements of things that are distant but nearby, within the vicinity of a scientific measuring instrument, can say to you, well, this is really interesting, and it's not this, and it's not this, and it's not this, mm-hmm. and look at these characteristics. But leaping from there to aliens is not going to be easy. Right. But that's this is science, and what we're trying to do is science by measuring this phenomena that's been around now for so long. You can't rely on witness reports as your sole source and your only source of information.
The interview with Dr. Mark Rodeghier can be heard in its entirety on API Conversations, Episode 7. Again, Dr. Rodeghier is the President and Scientific Director of the J. Allen Hynek Center for UFO Studies based in Chicago. He is also the Science Director on the UFODATA Project.
This is API Case Files.
The next segment is with Paul Carr, API's Deputy Director. Paul looks at some of the strategies science is employing in the search for other cosmic civilizations.
This is Paul Carr with Unidentified Science number 9. This time, I will take a break from grousing about what's wrong with UFO research to talk about some other exciting areas of research in which professional scientists can get involved without jeopardizing their careers, and which may, I emphasize, may, lead us to some clues about technological ET civilizations. Something I think we are all desperate for any clue whatever about. I won't have time to go into detail here, but there will be links in the show notes at apicasefiles.com where you can learn as much as you want. Since about 1960, when I was still in diapers, the search for extraterrestrial intelligence, or SETI, has been a very modestly funded set of efforts looking for distant signals from ET in the electromagnetic spectrum. Given the instruments we have to search with, the only signals we'll see are those deliberately sent our way by a civilization taking a chance that someone here might be listening. Now, that's a bit oversimplified, but even as such a signal is sent, we have to be looking in the right direction at the right time to catch it, and if it doesn't repeat, then we can't say for sure it's ET. There have been many interesting signals seen during SETI searches by radio and optical telescopes in the last 57 years, but the lack of repetition part has been the spoiler. Looking for signal beacons, however, is not the only promising SETI strategy. Also in 1960, a physicist named Freeman Dyson proposed that astronomers could look for advanced alien civilizations from their inevitable waste heat, as they used more and more of the energy from their own sun or nearby stars to power their growth. Later, SETI scientist Jill Tarter pointed out that a civilization might very well intentionally leave clues to their existence that would be found in the normal course of astronomical work. As our instruments cover more of the electromagnetic spectrum from radio to gamma rays, the hope increases that we'll find something that doesn't easily admit to natural explanation. Lately, there's been some excitement that the Kepler Space Telescope, which began observations in 2009, may have seen something just like that. There is an ordinary, mature star called KIC 8462852, or Boyajian star, that is behaving in a way that no ordinary mature star is expected to behave. During the 4 years that the Kepler telescope was watching it, its brightness suddenly dipped several times by a much greater amount than a planet passing in front of it could cause, as high as 20%, which is nearly equivalent to all the energy flux our sun puts out. Tabitha Boyajian, an astronomer who was then at Yale, led a team that conducted observations by ground and space-based telescopes. These observations ruled out all the usual explanations, and so we are left with an intriguing puzzle. Where's the flux? One of the hypotheses put forth for why the star's brightness varies in such a weird way is that an advanced technological civilization has built very large structures around the star that occasionally block the light from our point of view. It's actually not a completely crazy idea, but it has problems, the biggest of which is that we don't see the waste heat we would expect. That sun's worth of power has to go somewhere, and we would expect it to show up in the infrared, but it isn't. It took crowdfunding, but in 2016, Tabitha Boyajian put together a telescope network to monitor the star's brightness daily. This effort has begun to pay off, as dips in brightness have once again been seen with these telescopes starting in May of 2017. The hope is that soon we will understand what sort of material is blocking the light, especially if we see another large dip. If, after every natural explanation has been ruled out, then maybe we can start talking about megastructures. But not the traditional Dyson swarms we're used to thinking in terms of, something stranger. If it gets strange enough, then it might just be E.T., since, as we've discussed before, we have good reason to expect E.T. to be strange indeed. All I can say right now is, stay tuned. There is another star. It is every bit as strange as Boyajian's star, but in a different way, and that one is called Cybulski's star. I hope I pronounced that right. The spectrum of light coming from this star makes no sense to astronomers who study such things, and it is still being debated. Could it be the result of advanced stellar engineering? Well, maybe. Then there is Swedish astronomer Beatrice Villaroel, who, together with a couple of her colleagues, found a star that may have disappeared altogether over the course of just a few decades. That doesn't make sense. And there is an infrared object nearby that possibly could be it. Or not. Like the vast majority of objects in the sky, it hasn't been studied in detail, and the whole thing could just be a misunderstanding. Or it may be our first Dyson swarm. In all this, the only thing we're sure of is that the universe will keep surprising us, and will keep seeking out and destroying our complacency when we think we have things figured out. Trust me, you want to be there when that happens.
That was API Deputy Director Paul Carr. Before ending the show, I'd like to pass along a few tips regarding distance and altitude self-training for objects in the sky. Observation and reporting skills are very important and assist UFO, UAP investigators in providing good data input on reports from witnesses. Using a combination of a Google search and specified apps, one can often get most any information needed. I rely mostly on the apps Flight Radar 24, Terminal 11's Sky View Satellite Guide, Starwalk 2, Google, and Google Earth. Some of these apps are free, and those that aren't are relatively inexpensive, well worth the cost in my opinion. Regarding altitude, distance, and speed information of aerial objects, there are various ways to determine or extrapolate how high an object is, its distance from the witness, and the relative speed of an object, just by using Flight Radar 24 and performing a basic Google info search. Let's drill down. Say, for example, a witness reports that an object was flying about the height of a typical police helicopter in their city. If the witness report came from a citizen of the Baltimore area or the Miami-Dade County area, let's say, you can be relatively sure that helicopters on patrol there fly at about 500 feet. How do I know that? I Googled the question, how high do traffic helicopters in Baltimore typically fly? Or let's say a witness living between Auburn and Kent in Washington state reports an object in the sky at about the same altitude as normal incoming traffic to SeaTac Airport in Seattle. The distance between Auburn and Kent is about 7 miles. Normal incoming commercial airplane traffic altitude is about 2,800 feet around Auburn, but by the time it reaches Kent 7 miles north, the plane altitude is typically around 1,600 to 1,500 feet. So you can extrapolate that in between those two areas, the object may have been between 2,200 and 2,000 feet in the air. How do I know this? I Googled the distance between Auburn and Kent, then used the app Flight Radar 24. This app tracks real-time most all commercial traffic. You can pinpoint exactly the altitude and speed of most any aircraft. If you concentrate on a certain area, for example, an airport, you can see the typical flight patterns into and out of that landing corridor. This data is a pretty good guesstimate to use in your investigative report. I also use Flight Radar 24 to help train my eye on what a specific object of a specific size looks like at a specific altitude. For example, I live just outside Cadillac, Michigan, and over my home there is a fair amount of smaller aircraft flights traveling due north to Traverse City, Michigan. Using Flight Radar 24, I can observe exactly what an object the size of a Cessna 441 Conquest looks like at 6,000 feet. So I can see what an object 39 feet long with a wingspan of 49 feet looks like up in the air at 6,000 feet. And further, because of the data from Flight Radar 24, I know this object is traveling 200 miles an hour. So I can determine how quickly that object can travel from a particular distance during the time of observation. I know what time it passed over me, traveling at 200 miles per hour, 6,000 feet in the air, and I can track the plane's location on Flight Radar 24 to when it disappears from my sight over the hills of a known distance. So I train myself to observe the altitude of a known object at a known speed over a known distance. I think it's kind of neat and rather engaging to increase my skills as an observer. I think you might find it engaging too, and helpful, when a witness report requires some research of this type during an investigation. Well, that brings this episode of API Case Files to an end. I've been your host, Marsha Barnhart, and I was joined by my colleague, Paul Carr, Deputy Director for the Aerial Phenomenon Investigations Team. I want to thank Dr. Mark Rodeghier for his information on the UFODATA Project. Remember, his full interview is available now on API Conversations. And I'm also most grateful to the witnesses who appeared on the program reporting their anomalous experiences. It's often very difficult to find the courage to speak up about a sighting, and even more rare to be willing to be recorded and included on an on-air report. It's an honor and a privilege to work with witnesses to try to find some explanation for what they saw. Clearly, sometimes an explanation cannot be found. This can be rather disconcerting for the witness and the investigator. But when you follow the leads, and the leads take you to a blind alley, an answer may not be forthcoming. This podcast is a production of Aerial Phenomenon Investigations. Links in the show notes for this episode can be found at apicasefiles.com. The spoken content of API Case Files is distributed under the Creative Commons Attribution Share Alike 4.0 license. All music heard on this podcast is licensed under Creative Commons. This free use with attribution music is deeply appreciated, and we thank the musicians and songwriters for sharing their creative spirit. Featured during this episode were compositions by Alien Chronicler, Art of Escapism, Soft and Furious, and All India Radio. Our podcast theme is a mashup of two groups, Totality Music and DJ Spooky. If you want to drop us a line, that would be great. We can read your letters on the show. We always appreciate your input and ideas on content. Email director@aerial-phenomenon.org. Meanwhile, thanks for joining us, and we hope you recommend API Case Files and API Conversations to your friends and acquaintances.
This is API Case Files.